There they are, the protesters of Hong Kong. They're still fighting for democracy, still asking the United States for help with China. But so far, President Trump's been very cautious about taking sides. However, last month, the manager of a top US basketball team went where the White House feared to tread, tweeting out, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." China's response was so massive and financially intimidating that NBA stars past and present abandoned their fellow American, with one notable giant exception. Here's the story. This is Daryl Morey, manager of the Houston Rockets. And this is his tweet supporting protesters in Hong Kong who'd been on the streets for 4 grueling months. China's response was to denounce Morey and to order the Chinese Basketball Association and other companies to cut ties with him and his team.
The NBA is facing backlash in China after the general manager of the Houston Rockets posted a tweet in support of the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong.
Suddenly, Morey looked isolated. The NBA called his tweet regrettable. The Rockets owner, his boss, said he didn't speak for the team. And Morey's top player went further, issuing this fawning apology.
Yeah, we apologize. We love China. We love playing there. We love everything they're about, and we appreciate the support that they give us.
Morey deleted his tweet, but even that didn't satisfy China, which turned the screws yet again, taking NBA games off their air and off their internet.
The financial fallout over the NBA just continues.
But NBA boss Adam Silver said it was a price worth paying.
It's not something we expected to happen. I think it's unfortunate, but if that's the consequences of us adhering to our values, we still feel it's critically important we adhere to those values.
The NBA's biggest star spoke out a few days later, but not to support his fellow American, but to safeguard his Chinese income.
We all talk about this freedom of speech. Yes, we all do have freedom of speech, but at times there are ramifications for the negative that can happen when you're not thinking about others.
A big, rich athlete who had no problem calling his own president a bum insists on maximum respect for China.
And some of the NBA's biggest players and owners who routinely exercise their freedom to criticize this country lose their voices when it comes to the freedom and rights of the people of China.
Well, is that a fair criticism? China's ruling Communist Party certainly doesn't think so, but what about our panel? Very different views up here. Nathan Law is a well-known activist from Hong Kong who's been jailed in the past for protesting. He thinks the NBA should not give in to China. We also have Dean Crutchfield, a marketing expert who helps big brands when they're in crisis mode. He believes the NBA should have fired Morey right away. And finally, we have Marshall Kramsky, an award-winning sports journalist who says he expected more from the NBA. And LeBron, let's start with you, Dean. Quite a controversial opinion. You think Morey should have been fired the very next day?
Look, I'm a proud American. I love my flag. I love my passport, and it means a lot to me. But what I do see here is, let's put it in perspective. Again, with great respect for the democracy that's being pushed for in Hong Kong. If you were a plumber, an electrician, a contractor, a shop assistant, a shop manager, shop owner, manager, managing director, or a general manager like Daryl, and you went into your place of business tomorrow and you took a large hit at your most important business partner or customer, costing your business potentially billions of dollars and millions of fans or customers in this case, then it's likely you would not have your job by the end of the day. And that is simply my issue. It was reckless, irresponsible, and thoughtless of Morey in his regard as a senior official of the #1 team of the #1 sport in China, its #1 most important business partner, to have said this.
Dean, you call it a reckless statement by Daryl Morey. A lot of people would say it's actually a principled statement. He's an American making a statement about America's most beloved quality, which is freedom of speech. And he's making it on an American tech platform, Twitter, which is not formally available in China. And really, nobody can tell him what to say and what not to say in a free country.
Well, I think that, we're not really, again, I think a lot of people have said we're not actually complaining about the substance of the statement. Hundreds of millions of people around the world agreed with the sentiments of that statement. There's millions and millions of people who support pro-democracy in this world, especially America. So it's a very strong opinion of ours that we stand to and we believe in. I think that the whole problem comes from how the NBA's handled this crisis from the get-go. They had no crisis plan. When they launched their first statement, it was timid and weak and pathetic and apologetic, and it needn't have been. Then Silver corrected that with a more statement that had more of an emboldened stance about freedom of speech and expression, which is all well and good. But one of the problems that the NBA had from the get-go, which upset a lot of Western and pro-democracy viewers, is the fact that it wasn't honest about where we stand. And we do stand with freedom and democracy. There is no doubt about that. That's the very belief we've had. There's nothing wrong with what Daryl said. It was the wrong person to say it. It wasn't, it's unbecoming of a senior official of
Nathan,
the number one.
come in.
Well, I think it's quite absurd to say that is a irresponsible statement, because that is what he believes in. That is his freedom to express his will. And I think if we assume that we all have to kowtow to China to earn a business, to make a business with China, I think that is fundamentally wrong. First of all, we have to have our own values, and I think we cannot be considered in that perspective, given that we are defending our very fundamental value, which is freedom of speech. And secondly, if you look at the NBA situation in China, actually there are pushback. There are meticulously interwoven interests among these business, the rights of broadcasting, and these interests are actually responding to the government saying that, oh, you should not react that sensitively. And I think the situation of NBA in China, if they are going to put into a hypothetical case that Silver is going to fire Morey, then they will demand more if we do not stand firm towards these absurd requests from China. Then we will lose our values bit by bit, and that is not compensated by business interests or any money that we make. I don't think that it's a trend that we should praise, that we should follow.
Let's have a quick listen to Shaquille O'Neal now. He's taking the exact opposite approach to LeBron James and was a massive legend in the NBA once upon a time. Here he is supporting Daryl Morey and also his right to free speech.
We as American people, we do a lot of business in China, and they know and understand our values, and we understand their values. And one of our best values here in America is free speech. We're allowed to say what we want to say, and we're allowed to speak up about injustices, and that's just how it goes. And if people don't understand that, that's something that they have to deal with.
Wow, let's go to Marshall now. Marshall, I don't know if you've ever met Shaquille O'Neal, but he comes across as a very forthright character who says basically, look, this is our game, these are our stars, you get used to us, we don't get used to you. What do you make of that?
For people who have followed Shaquille O'Neal's career, that is as Shaq-esque as could be. With that said, it's a very sticky situation where the people are coming out and they're making political statements and taking sides politically, where people need to remember, and one of the big things that are, that is being discussed around all sports in the United States at the moment is these players and these officials, they're hired because they're entertaining and the best at an athletic ability. They're not necessarily role models, but since they are given this platform, what they say obviously is in the eye of the public.
Well, strangely, there is actually one NBA team owner in particular who has really turned on Daryl Morey and defended China, and that man is Joseph Tsai. Not only is he an NBA team owner, he's also the co-founder of a massive Chinese company called Alibaba. In a long Facebook posting, he basically wrote that China has a right to be sensitive about its territory, considering the wars with the British in the 19th century, and that Chinese citizens stand united when it comes to the territorial integrity of China and the country's sovereignty over her homeland. The issue is non-negotiable. Nathan, do you accept that?
Well, obviously, the statement made by Joe Tsai is definitely cooperating with the state propaganda from China, because he framed that Hong Kong's movement as a separatist movement, but in fact, it is not. It's a movement that fights for autonomy and democracy, and these values are being granted by, being promised to implement in Hong Kong in 1980s when the Chinese government and the British government was negotiating about the hangover of Hong Kong. So we're just fighting for the things that Chinese government promised us, and now they're trying to stigmatize it and discredit it by framing it as a separatist movement, and that's what Tsai has been saying, and that is not true. So it's obvious that it is an irresponsible statement made by Tsai, accusing Morey based on a wrong accusation that he made.
Well, Joseph Tsai might be China's strongest supporter in the NBA, but it's actually the Houston Rockets that have become China's favourite team ever since they recruited Yao Ming in 2002. The 7'6" player, or 229 centimetres for those of you working in metric, is now the head of China's Basketball Association. Marshall, we've got a Chinese superstar from the Rockets period, back in China, now the head of the CBA, cutting links to his old team. Do you think that he would have made that decision on his own, or do you think he would have been directed to do that?
I think it's a tough situation. I think that there was probably direction because he was beloved by Houston and Houston loved him. To this day, like, as you mentioned, they're the #1 franchise across all of sports in China. Even the Rockets are one of the few teams in the NBA who actually have on a Chinese Heritage Night, they have uniforms with Chinese characters for their logo. But it's not just Yao Ming. It goes further than him. By the time 2006 rolled around, former Rockets player Tracy McGrady was the #1 selling uniform in China. And now James Harden is in the top 2 as well. So as far as your question on is Yao Ming being directed, I think there's a very strong possibility he is. But Yao Ming also made it very, very clear when he was a Rocket, he's a nationalistic guy and he supports China in many ways. So I think it's really tough without being on the inside to make any assumptions. But I think as a part of, the Chinese Basketball Association, he's getting direction from somewhere.
Let's focus on LeBron James. He's been willing to speak up for civil rights in America, where doing so carries relatively little risk. In fact, it really only enhances his image. But when it comes to China, well, it's a very different ballgame.
LeBron, the King James, the NBA's greatest star, some say the greatest ever, a dominant force on the court. LeBron uses his fame to speak up for civil rights. For example, backing his friend Colin Kaepernick and the Black Lives Matter movement.
I stand with Cap. I kneel with Cap.
And he tweets with Cap too, reaching some 44 million followers. Quite moving stuff sometimes, like this quote from Martin Luther King: "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter."
We are the people who get to the promised land.
And on his own show, admiring guests compare him to Muhammad Ali.
I liken you to Ali. Like Ali was, at the time, the greatest.
Right.
And he never misses a chance to criticize President Trump.
LeBron, you called the president a bum.
Yeah, straight up. Straight up.
We obviously know why Trump don't with you.
Yeah.
But as brave as he appears in the United States, he's taking no risks when it comes to China, denouncing Daryl Morey's tweet.
Many people could have been harmed, not only financially, but physically, emotionally, spiritually. So just be careful what we tweet and we say and what we do, even though, yes, we do have freedom of speech, but there can be a lot of negative that comes with that too.
LeBron even wrote that Morey's tweet had made his team's trip to China a few days later a difficult week, and that he, quote, could have waited a week to send it. Try telling that to the people of Hong Kong. But then again, business is business.
Why should LeBron not be able to protect his financial interests in the NBA and Nike?
And his sponsor Nike, which pays him $32 million a year, couldn't agree more. But this apparent double standard hasn't gone unnoticed.
Nike promotes itself as a so-called social justice champion. But when it comes to Hong Kong, it prefers checking its social conscience at the door.
And people who once admired LeBron are now branding him and Nike the king of the hypocrites.
Harsh stuff. Let's go to Marshall for a moment. Marshall, I heard from some very well-respected American commentators that Nike basically controls the NBA in a way through all its money.
Yeah, I mean, Nike is a huge power player. Everywhere you look, you'll see the swoosh logo. And don't forget the Jordan brand, which is Michael Jordan, is a branch of Nike. Very, very, powerful and eminent within the United States. And I think it's really interesting, you were talking about in the previous story about LeBron James and his actions. He's one of the leaders in the NBA, what's quote unquote called the Shut Up and Dribble campaign, which he talks about on his own show about how players and, people involved in the NBA and all of sports in America should be able to have the right to speak up, regardless of what their views are. And he later responded to his soundbite you had there saying to the effect that, I'm not going to comment on the exact situation about the content, because he realizes later on that, okay, this is a sticky situation. That's not really fitting my social justice warrior profile, but it was hurting the business. So LeBron James, I think, was doing a lot of what a lot of people in this situation have been doing, is reacting from the gut, just like I believe Nike has, instead of using their massive PR and content teams telling them what the proper moves to go forward is based on what they believe and based on what would be best for them financially.
Dean, a lot of people are going to call LeBron James, indeed they have called LeBron James a hypocrite.
Let's look at the LeBron James case. I think, it's quite stunning to watch the attack that he's received, the bad-mouthing from the media, the attack from the politicians. Basically, there's someone who was standing in front of a bunch of very eager journalists without a script, who came out with some unchoice words maybe, but he made a statement of expression. He even talked about Colin Kaepernick, who also was attacked by the media and rattled by the politicians. So one has to be careful when we talk about freedom of expression, because even at home, when someone actually voices it, they often can be attacked and pulled down for it.
Let's hear again from Charles Barkley, a LeBron, should we say, admirer, who makes it very clear that business interests do come first. Let's have a listen.
You don't get free speech in China. You get free speech in the United States. You don't get to impart your values in other countries. It doesn't work like that. I can't go to another country and say we're going to do things our way.
Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, Dean. He's saying you don't get free speech in China, you get free speech in the United States. Well, as we've mentioned, Daryl Morey was making his remarks on an American tech platform in America, and actually, it's LeBron who wants to shut his free speech down.
Well, I think it's, everyone's got their own. There's tension between the poles of right and wrong, depending on what side of the street you're on. I'm an American. I'm pro-democracy, big time. That's what I believe, and I love our flag. But I also look at things in a more objective way, understanding both parties here. And that's what we have, a crisis management situation that needs to be handled with lots of shuttle diplomacy. And the strategy has been entirely wrong, and it's caused more damage than it needed to.
Dean, you're looking at this from a sort of marketing perspective and a business perspective, but how much money do they need? I mean, basketball players before the NBA was massive in China were already millionaires. I mean, can't they afford to stand on a principled position for once and just, if they have to, just get out of China?
Well, I'm pleased you say that. I think it's called capitalism. And we do like capitalism, and capitalism's about pushing into new markets with great products at the right prices that can't be copied. And that's what it's all about. And China represents a huge market opportunity. You need to have principles, but sometimes it's not so much what you stand for, it's who you stand for. And in this case, we have 500 million Chinese who love basketball. They spend, billions of dollars.
Well, that's the point, Dean. That's the point. So can't the United States, can't the NBA afford to say, you love our product, we're going to stare you down, you blink first?
Well, Silvers said that, and I said that second statement recalibrated more of the stand about hide nothing, tell all, about the honor and the truth of what America believes in from a principled standpoint. He's done that. I just believe there was one fatal mistake, that a senior official of a major piece of your business that has a lot of responsibility showed reckless endeavor without thinking about what he was tweeting. I'm not criticizing what he tweeted. I'm criticizing the person who tweeted it. And the other interesting thing is, as well, that makes it worse, is he actually used a logo of an organization that publicly calls for the political and economic aggression towards China, which was more upsetting. This wasn't just some casual tweet. It was thought out. It was, it was considered.
Well, I'm also really uncomfortable to hear such victim-blaming discourse, saying that if, more like, for example, Morey, such a prominent manager in NBA, says something that may have touched some sensitive point of China, then he's being recognized, he's being irresponsible. I totally disagree on this discourse, because he's a person with capital, with cultural capitals, influences in America, and he wants to speak up for things that he considers right He considered justice, and also he's been like under huge pressure after issuing that to force to delete that tweet. And I think that's exactly how terrible the situation is. China has been abusing its power of economy and like controlling market to urge people around the world to do whatever they want.
Nathan, when you hear people comparing LeBron James to Muhammad Ali, I doubt that you really feel the same about him.
Well, I think the statement made by LeBron James shows that he's just selfish on this regard. Like for NBA players, for their managers, they should stand in solidarity to support each other's exercise of freedom of speech. It's the most important values in America.
Dean, you're old enough to remember Muhammad Ali. The man gave up his heavyweight title, his boxing license. He could have been put into jail, and this was at a time of heightened racial tensions in the United States. That is a man who was willing to give up his money for principle. Surely in LeBron James we have the exact reverse, not willing to give up his money for principle.
It's a very tough question to answer, and I think that we have to understand what are our priorities when it comes to solving the solution. I think LeBron James is just looking to be, as he is, the face of the game. He's the face of the sport. He wanted to get involved and say something to calm the trouble that's going on, and he got misinterpreted because he really didn't think about the script and he didn't think about the words he mentioned. I think all he was really trying to say is, really my point is, Daryl was the wrong person to be saying this kind of statement given his senior role representing the NBA as he does with the #1 sports team and the #1 sports franchise with their #1 business partner, China. He was just the wrong person. I mean, McDonald's has just fired their CEO by having a consensual relationship with a fellow employee at McDonald's. I mean, companies have rules, sometimes very harsh ones. And so this is a senior official with conduct unbecoming.
OK, well, the NBA has said it's his personal account. He's not representing the NBA in this. But we're going to move on. And it's not just Nike, which we've already mentioned, that has been affected by Chinese strong arming, if you like. They can be seen pushing American corporations around for years, and they've tended to have actually some success. Here's a few recent examples.
I just want to escape. Dad always wanted me to travel the world.
Yes, the world, but whose version of the world? In this film, jointly produced by America's DreamWorks and a Chinese company, you can clearly see the 9-dash line, showing China's controversial claim to the whole of the South China Sea. And Beijing's also particularly sensitive about Taiwan. Last year, it forced US airlines to list the territory as belonging to China, and one by one, the airlines made the changes. And then there's Hong Kong. Earlier this year, China forced Tiffany Jewelers to scrap this ad because it appeared to be supporting activists who made the same gesture in solidarity with a protester who was shot in the eye. The NBA, then, is far from the first company to be sanctioned over the territory.
Nathan, have you noticed, as China has grown more powerful and richer, that it's able to exert greater and greater influence on American companies?
When we examine these incidents, we have to really look in perspective whether the claim China has been making is legitimate and is right. And if it is not, then they are like forcing this company, and well, these companies succumbed because of intimidation, because of retaliation in commercial interest. As long as China still maintains that influence, we need to have counterbalance to that, to say that principles and values are really important. And well, at the end of the day, if we keep silent on that, well, every bit of values that China does not agree, which is all, will be losing bit by bit.
Marshall, a final question for you. Looking down the road here, the relationship between China and the NBA, how do you see this playing out over the next couple of weeks and months?
I think it's going to be a very interesting situation because I think now on the flip side, China is going to use it as a business deal and try and bring down their previous contract and say, all right, you know what, we won't even air the games. We said they signed a $1.5 billion rights deal going forward for the next 5 years. I foresee China going back to the NBA and saying, all right, we're going to actually make this only $750 million now, or whatever the number might be, trying to find a way that they could save a buck, because at the end of the day, they're going to have to air the NBA in China. It's too massive of a market. There's too much of a demand for it. One of the most visited museums in China right now is the Stephon Marbury Museum, which is based on Stephon Marbury, who couldn't even make a career in the NBA towards the end of it and became the best player in the Chinese Basketball League's history. So I think they absolutely are going to have to start airing it. They might have continued restriction, as they do with many media outlets, but I believe that they're going to use this as a business advantage, especially the companies trying to get money back from the NBA. And I think the NBA is going to have no choice but to be compliant because of all the human rights issues that would come from anything else.
So that confirms it then. They are just too powerful. It's a win-win situation for them. Marshall Kramsky, Nathan Law and Dean Crutchfield, thank you so much for your contributions to the Nexus. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and thank you for watching. Remember, you can see this and all our previous episodes on our YouTube channel, but for now, goodbye and see you next week.